Good afternoon. Aloha and welcome to the Hawaii Retirement Savings Board meeting. I'd like to call the meeting to order on December the 15th, 2023 at 2:30 p.m. My name is Bill Kunzman and I am the Deputy Director of the Department of Labor and Industrial Relations, and I am the Director of Labor's designee as co-chair of this board. This is a public meeting under Hawaii Sunshine Law, Chapter 92 Hawaii Revised Statutes, which we are conducting in person as well as Zoom, and this meeting is being recorded. To start the meeting and to document in the minutes, I will take a roll call of the voting members and then ex officio non-voting members. Remote board members, please note that at the advice of the Department of the Attorney General, the chat box has been disabled and you should keep your camera on. Okay. I will go in alphabetical order. Jesse Keola Dean. Present. Barbara Krieg.
Present.
Andrew Nomura.
Here.
Brian Taniguchi.
Here.
Karen Yasukawa.
Here.
Director Salaveria.
Here and alone in my room.
Very good. And myself, William Kunzman, I am here. Do we have Representative Andrew Takuya Garrett online? Rep Garrett, are you there? Okay.
Yes, I'm sorry, I'm here.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And Senator Sharon Moriwaki, are you with us? It looks like Senator is trying to connect. Okay, we will try to come back to Senator. In the meantime, I also want to take this opportunity to allow members of the public present to introduce themselves and the organization they represent on a voluntary basis. And if there are any attendees who are not alone in the room, please introduce those who you are with.
Aloha, Kelly E. Lopez. Good to see all you handsome and beautiful people there. Happy holidays. I am in my car and not alone, but Buddy doesn't understand English, so we're good to go.
Okay, very good. Is there anybody else? Senator Moriwaki, are you there? It looks like she is trying to connect, so we will go back and introduce Senator Moriwaki when she joins us. Agenda item number 2 is approval of the minutes for the June 27, 2023 meeting. Did anybody have any notes or corrections or suggestions on those minutes? Okay, if not, those minutes are accepted. The next agenda item is public comment. On our agenda, we'll take written and oral testimony at this time for agenda items, and we'll also provide an opportunity for testimony as we go through the agenda items. Is there anyone wishing to provide testimony at this time on any of our agenda items? Seeing none, we'll move on to item number 4, executive session. We are going to take a vote on going into executive session to discuss a personnel matter pursuant to section 92.5A2 Hawaii Revised Statutes to consider the hire, evaluation, dismissal, or discipline of an officer or employee where consideration of matters affecting privacy will be involved. And this is specifically for the hiring of the executive director pursuant to section 389.3F Hawaii Revised Statutes. Could I get a motion to convene an executive meeting pursuant to section 92.5A2 HRS to consider the hire of the executive director pursuant to section 389.3F HRS? Second. Okay, I'll go ahead and take a vote of all the members present. Jesse Keola Dean. Barbara Krieg.
Yes.
Andrew Nomura, Ryan Taniguchi. Karen Yasukawa, Director Salaveria,
Aye.
and myself, William Kingston. I also vote to go into executive session. So we will now go into an executive session via a breakout room, and we will reconvene in this room at the conclusion of the executive session and report on our discussion in the executive session. So I believe Rep. Garrett and Senator Moriwaki, you will have an option to join our breakout room.
And Lewis.
And Lewis, I'm sorry. I mean Director Salaveras.
Lewis is fine.
Yeah, probably. Sorry, it's David Rodriguez. For those of you who don't know. Hello. Can everybody hear me who is remote? I believe so. Okay, very good. We have now concluded our executive session. And we will go on to agenda item number 5, hiring of the executive director. And we will start with a report of what just occurred, the broad outlines in executive session. So the board discussed the hiring of the executive director pursuant to 389-3F HRS and pursuant to section 92.5 A2 HRS. This was done in executive session because the consideration of matters affecting privacy occurred. The Uniform Information Privacy Act, WIPA 92F14, significant privacy interest provides examples. Specifically in B4, it says information in the agency's personnel file, applications, nominations, recommendations, or proposals for public employment or appointment to a government position as an example of a significant privacy interest. With that being said, I do want to provide an overview of the hiring panel's process and work. Pursuant to an earlier decision by the board to have the co-chairs of the board go through a selection process and employ an executive director pursuant to 389-3F for consideration of approval by the board. A panel was formed that consisted of myself, Leila Sharf, who was formerly our administrative services officer, and had some private sector experience in the financial sector, as well as Thomas Williams from the executive director of the Employees Retirement System. We posted the announcement on the DLIR and DHER's websites on July the 18th, and those announcements remain posted there. We also had announcements posted with several national associations like the National Association of State Retirement Administrators, the National Council on Teacher Retirement, and the National Conference on Public Employee Retirement Systems. We received 8 applications by mid-September, and the panel screened them and selected 3 to conduct interviews virtually, as all 3 were from outside of Hawaii. The panel decided to break the selection process into 2 rounds with the 3 finalists. We conducted virtual interviews with all 3 applicants and decided which of those to invite to a further interview or round 2. Round 2 consisted of an in-person discussion interview with the panel members, as well as a discussion with the directors of labor and budget and finance. We conducted the 3 virtual interviews during the last week of October and decided to choose 2 candidates for a further in-person interview. We paid for the airfare, hotel, and a per diem for each candidate, which accounts for all the expenses to date for the board. We currently have an offer on the table for a candidate and hope and expect to get an answer from this person by Monday, December the 18th. Is there any questions or discussion about that from any of the board members? Do we have anyone participating in this meeting who would like to provide testimony at this time on this matter? Or have any questions? Okay, thank you. If not, we will go on to agenda item number 6, delegation of authority to exercise the powers and duties. 389-4 or 389-3F Hawaii Revised Statutes provides the board or its co-chairs with the approval of the board may employ an executive director exempt from chapters 76 and 89 and other staff necessary to perform its duties. So that is the statutory basis for the delegation of authority from the board to the executive director or any other staff to perform any of the board's duties and responsibilities. In discussions with Mike, our deputy AG, we learned that this delegation of authority can be made to a position and not necessarily just to a person. So the question for the board at this time is, would they like to delegate the authority for the executive director to perform the functions of the board?
So my instinct is to say, that's a big question. And there are a lot of duties that are enumerated in 389-4, and I think it would be helpful if we could each take the time after this meeting to go through this list and be prepared to answer that next time. I mean, in my experience on boards, I've not had to actually delegate a statutory authority other than, for example, a contracting authority up to a certain dollar amount. So like I said, I think that's a big question.
Yeah, I think that's a good point.
I mean, is there a recommendation? Are you saying that you recommend that we just wholesale say, yeah, we'll delegate all of our responsibilities? Because I think that would be abrogating our responsibility of oversight.
No, it was merely for a discussion point at the board at this point, and I would just like to remind all the members and participants that we put this agenda together with the thought that we were going to be hiring an executive director today, and we're not.
Which means we have a little more time to. consider.
Yes, yes, and I think you make a great point, because, yeah, it is kind of complicated, all the duties and responsibilities of the board, and I don't know to what extent the board wants to say, up or down on all of it, or select portions of it, and, so if you folks would like to do that, we could put that on an agenda for a subsequent board meeting. And maybe we can provide some information as part of that in order to help if you folks want to, for your consideration for a subsequent meeting, to make this decision about whether to approve delegating all of the duties and responsibilities or a portion of the duties and responsibilities to the executive director. Senator.
Just a question, was that a date specific when the applicant would get back to us so that, we could keep the ball rolling in terms of, okay, if it's Monday or next week, then at least the board can be informed we go forward or what we have to do, and maybe a special meeting, I don't know, so that we could at least get the personnel on board and, at least keep it moving.
Yeah, so we expect to have an answer from the applicant by Monday, December the 18th.
Okay. And can we do something? So if it's yes, this, or if it's no, this, but at least the board will convene or get notice and a special meeting, or at least a date set when we can come back together so that we can decide what to do next.
I believe the intention is to have a board meeting as soon as possible if we get an affirmative answer. And if not, then maybe we would look at having the next meeting sometime in the early part of next year. If we have an affirmative answer, we would like to try to get everybody, we would like to have the next board meeting between Christmas and New Year's.
Okay, that sounds reasonable. Thank you.
So as I'm looking at HRS 389-4, yeah, I don't think we can delegate everything within that list. So it would be helpful to have a recommendation of what we should delegate. If that is.
Or what is necessary to delegate to make sure that the executive director has the tools and the authority to move ahead with whatever the executive director needs to do.
Okay.
So there have to be some, some specific things, whether it's contracting authority. There have to be certain things that we obviously couldn't and shouldn't, delegate. But maybe there's a core of what is necessary and important. Can we start with? Because obviously we're all, subject to
Op-
change.
something as far as being able to operate
Right.
without
Right,
making certain decisions that,
Right.
you know, may be more complex or involved, like, for example,
Oversight.
investments or whatever, right, the oversight functions.
Yeah, I think the idea is, totally up to the discretion of the board on what powers they want to delegate.
but why do we have to delegate any of the powers? Is there anything specifically you feel that if we don't delegate it, we will be hindering the program?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to think back to why you want an executive director versus the board carrying out every one of these functions. One of the problems is, as we're discussing about just talking about hiring the ED, everything has to be public, right? And you have to be very careful about what's public and what's not. So I think it really comes down to what the board is hiring the ED for. I think, you really, day-to-day operations, you really just want to hand it off to the executive director, right? And the board's kind of setting the policy. And you kind of just, the executive director reports back to the board on the various things that he's done or will do or is considering doing. But, it's really up to the board, the way that it's set up statutorily.
I have a question. So how do other boards that oversee state programs delegate? I mean, we're not government experts. But, it would be helpful to have examples rather than just be told, we really have the ability to do whatever we want.
Is ERS the most closely related function?
I think we're gonna have to do some homework and report back to the board,
I think there's
and maybe look at
comp plan or
deferred comp,
UTF maybe.
UTF.
You have a certain authority that the ED has based on position description, right? Are you saying there are things in there that the ED can't move ahead on unless we give specific authorization to delegate? I mean, that,
My understanding is that this person would need approval from the board to do
Yeah.
anything at first. Because otherwise, the way it's set up, it's like either the board does it or the executive director.
so like, I think the easiest example is hiring,
Right.
okay? Hiring the program specialist,
Does the board want to delegate that to the executive
right?
director?
Which I think in our discussions, we've been saying, the ED candidates have been told they can pick, they can hire
Right.
somebody they want. Okay, that's an easy one in terms of just, you can at least identify signing contracts, what's the dollar amount? And we already went through a little bit of that discussion in terms of what do we delegate to DLIR in terms of spending money. But are there other specific duties like that you're talking about?
Yeah, so the way the statute is set up, so 389(3)(f) says the board can hire an executive director to carry out its duties. And then 389(4) says the board shall have the authority to do, all those things that are listed. So 389(4) doesn't say the executive director can do all these things, right? So the board has the power. The board has the power to carry out these functions. And the board has a power to hire someone to carry out its functions.
Right.
And so therefore, because 394 says the board has the power to do these things, you have to then transfer that power to the.
Although the executive director is our agent as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how, I guess, careful you want to be. I think, a program like this, you're starting off. My thought always is things go wrong. So when things go wrong, you want to make sure that you covered your tracks and there's a justification for everything. But it's, again, it's up to the discretion of the board. But the way statutorily it's set up, the statute's giving the board the authority to carry out these functions. It gives the board the idea, the authority to hire a person, but the functions are still statutorily sitting with the board.
I noticed that we have a question from A connect or someone's hand is up? AKNECHT, did you have something you wanted to say? If not, you can turn off your mic and try to interject at any time.
I'm sorry, I'm still having a really hard time conceptualizing what it is you're expecting us to sort of parse through and come and discuss here. Because for example, if you look at 389-4, there are, some of these are functions that would be set out in the rulemaking, right? And my thought is executive director with assistance of staff could do proposed rulemaking, but obviously take it then to us, the board, to review and decide if we agree, and then obviously we go through the rulemaking process. So in a case like that, is that something that you would have to expressly delegate to the executive director to say, you should now do a draft of the rule, 91 rulemaking?
Well, I think, that's sort of an example of, I think, why you might wanna grant the authority that you wanna grant out of 389-4. Because what happens when, we only wanted you to make proposed rules and, do all the research, but we want the final say. But if it's not clear, what if he just goes forward and makes rules and goes through chapter 91 rulemaking processes and has the rules, become effective?
So I think I have two follow-up questions on that. One is, in that example, what of 389-4 would we delegate to meet that example? But the other part is, wouldn't we be expecting to meet regularly, getting reports from the executive director on, let's say, monthly meetings, at least in the beginning, to make sure that we are all on the same page in terms of, because frankly, we all know something about this program and how ideally it will work. But speaking for myself, I couldn't be the executive director and sit down and put it all together. So I think we need all of us together with the ED, everybody's expertise. And frankly, I'd be relying on him to say, I think we should do this first, this second, this third. And then we have the discussion on whether or not we agree with that. So at that point, if he says, oh, I'm gonna set out approval of these rules, then we say, well, we want to have a say in that. But in my example, the discussion, I think, is I feel more comfortable doing it that way than saying up front, I'm gonna delegate away a lot of these responsibilities of the board, because we still have oversight. Whatever we delegate to the executive director, we are still responsible for. So other than, off the top of my head, the example of, we definitely should, in my opinion, delegate to the executive director the authority to hire staff, to the extent that it's necessary to delegate that. And, contracts up to X dollars, and off the top of my head, I can't think of any more that are so black and white that we would delegate, as opposed to saying, does that make sense?
Yeah, I completely understand. So I guess from a lawyer's point of view, I always think about the worst possible scenario that could happen. So we're always looking for what could possibly happen that's bad, that we don't want to happen. And I'm thinking about just in terms of sort of like buckets that you might want to think. One of it is job performance. Right? How are you going to measure job performance if it's unclear what his job actually was? That could be anywhere from pay raises to dismissal to discipline to everything else. But I also think, it's hard to sit here and think of every single thing. I guess if we thought hard enough, it'd come with all kinds of stuff where you'd really want it to be clear as to exactly who's responsible for what. And so I'm just thinking of a worst case scenario. You can meet, monthly and have a report, but, I'm thinking, well, if the reports are inaccurate, what if, he thinks something's not important for the board to know? What if, there's all kinds of things I think that can happen that it would probably be better if there was a clear delegation, but it could be It's not like you have to wholesale, like take, an item and say, we're just gonna wholesale give it to you. You can limit it, like you said about the administrative rules. So I think the board
No,
can.
no, I didn't say limited to that, that was just. an
No,
example.
I mean, no, I'm saying that any power function you delegate to the ED, you can limit that power. It doesn't have to be all exclusive. You can still maintain whatever oversight you want to maintain. So one, maybe administrative rules, you only do the proposed rules. We make the final approval of whether we want to put the rules forward for approval and adoption.
Sorry, at the moment, position description has executive director reporting to DLIR director, doesn't it?
Believe so, yes.
I think that's by statute, right?
Yeah.
So obviously we have day-to-day oversight there as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's that same 2635 HRS where the board has certain responsibilities and the director has others, right?
Bill, I have a, comment.
Sure, please, Senator.
So what I've seen in other boards, and I think that the difficulty here is we're starting from scratch, it's like starting from scratch, basically. But in other boards, they will direct, so the decision making is this rule going into effect? And then they put the rule out for decision making, for public comment, it comes back in, and then the board decides, yes, we're gonna go with this rule based on comment. So in this instance, because we're starting from scratch, I think looking at what is involved in having a functioning savings plan, and what are the major components, and that's where I think the board's expertise would help is step 1, 2, 3. These are things we need to do. And then you direct, hopefully we have the executive director and staff to go do research, see what other jurisdictions are doing in A, B, C, and D, and come back with some options. And then the board discusses the options and says, we're going to go this way or that way. But then the decision making is ultimately with the board, but the staff does all the homework and the research so that the board can make an informed decision. So I think we're starting from scratch so that say, what are the real fundamental questions that we need to have asked? And maybe that's where the importance of the board and the board's expertise is in terms of setting forth that part of it. So when the ED does come on board, you say to the ED, go research ABC. These are fundamental things we need to have to stand up this program. So, it's yes and no, but I think the board has a real big role to play because of the expertise of the board members to at least develop that framework of where to send staff to do the homework for us. So I just put it out there that it's tough because we don't have like other boards, HCDA or HHFDC, it's all set for years. So easy enough to say, okay, we're going to look at these projects and we're going to change the rules this way because it's already there. But we're creating it completely new. So maybe some of that work can be done, but without staff to actually do the homework, we could at least make the framework when the person comes on board.
I would think that, currently the board has all the responsibility and power to do things. So I think that once the executive director comes on board, then normally what's going to happen at a board meeting is that it's going to be he or she's going to be asking for, can I have authority to hire this person or hire, go out and hire, can I have authority to contract for up to $50,000 without board approval. Well, I think that's kind of where it goes, but we don't have the ED yet. We also, like Sharon, Senator Boardwalker said, that we have, it's kind of a startup. So a lot of our rules and things and where we want to actually kind of get in, we probably need to discuss. And are we going to limit what investment things they can do or specifically do that? But I think once the ED comes in, they will be making recommendations to the board and all these kinds of things. Otherwise, we have to, as the board, determine what we're going to delegate. We're keeping everything, but what we're going to.
We're relying very heavily on the expertise and experience of ED and hoping that it's the person
that
He
can
has
handle
the
that stuff,
experience
right?
that, you know,
Yeah.
that he's got.
I think what Brian said makes a lot of sense, because just thinking about, okay, so earlier I kind of volunteered to try to work on like, look at this and like, here's like low hanging fruit where maybe you can delegate or whatever, but it sounds like maybe like if, when an executive, well, A, we need an executive, underscores we need an executive director. B, just in the development and operations, some of these things are gonna come to light, and I think if the board errs on the side of conservatism and not delegating broadly, then it'll work out over time, right? And then if you need to yank some of it back. But I agree, it's brand new and it's a lot to try to fathom.
Right there. That's a
Hey,
question.
Bill, this is Andrew. Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Sorry, I'm not sure if this is appropriate in the public setting or if it's better in executive session, but I wanted to ask a question regarding the interview process with the candidates. You know, we're talking about the relationship between the executive director and the board itself. Has that been discussed with the candidates as to what that arrangement is? Because if this person is under the impression they're going to have a lot of autonomy, and then they accept the position and they find out that it's actually the board that's going to be driving a lot of the activity, then, you know, it might be a deal breaker for them or might not be what they thought it was, and they might end up not sticking around. So just wanted to put that out there if that discussion has already taken place. So everyone is clear on what the expectation is on that arrangement.
In the course of our discussions for the recruitment for the position, we made it clear that this position reports to the board.
Okay, thanks for clarifying.
Are there any other questions or comments from any members of the board? Or anybody from the public? It's a pretty good amount of food for thought.
I
Yo.
would it be possible to get examples of delegations?
Think we can ask that from some of the similar boards. Yes, yes. Okay, so at a subsequent meeting, we'll put that as an agenda item and report back to the board. Okay, if there is nothing else on that agenda item then. So we'll leave that one as it is then. We'll go on to agenda item number 7, the budget. We wanted to provide an update of what the current year's budget has been. So if you recollect, the board had previously approved the department spending up to $10,000 for the program. To date, the only expenses charged to the program are the expenses involved in bringing the 2 candidates for the executive director position, the airfare, hotel per diem. And that is outlined in there is something that looks like this, the memo form that provides an accounting of all the costs to date. There is also legal charges involved. A lot of those legal expenses, which the AG did on behalf of the program, happened in the previous fiscal year, so they're not reflected here. And then any current charges this fiscal year, we haven't received a report from the AGs yet. So I suspect that the amount of hours that the Department of the Attorney General has put into the program during the current fiscal year is relatively small. So
So we're getting programs being charged by the AG's office for a legal fund? Is that
Yes.
a relatively new protocol?
all our programs are charged for the services of the Department of the Attorney General.
Well, the DLIR has a lot of the federally funded programs. I
Those
understand that.
federally funded programs are charged, the generally funded programs are charged, the special funded programs are charged.
Or didn't work that way in my time at either DEVR or DOE, so just surprised.
That is how it works at the Department of Labor and Industrial Relations. We are charged for any work that the AG does on behalf of any part of the department. And when I was new to the department, I was surprised about that too.
Well, when you were new to your department, I was new to my department, so your department is handled differently than mine. That's-
Yeah, evidently. So with that being said, the expenses so far are about $3,100. 3105.41. If there's no other questions or discussions from the board members, is there anybody from the public who would like to testify on this particular agenda item? Okay. If not, moving on. So we also wanted to report that we're currently in the supplemental budget process. This first year of the biennium. As reflected in the budget worksheet from before, the department did not put in any changes or any supplemental requests to the current budget. So all budget items remain the same. The three positions, the IT costs and the travel remain in both years of the biennium. The feasibility study remains in the current fiscal year. So there may be a potential for that to lapse if depending on how the board feels about that, we may need to have discussion about that if the feasibility money is going to lapse and whether or not it might be recommended to go and try to get that extended to the next fiscal year or the second year of the biennium. But I just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of it at this point.
How much is that for?
That was $1 million. Questions or comments? And anybody from the public want to provide testimony on this agenda item or comments? Okay, the next agenda item is related to the authorization approval for the Department of Labor and Industrial Relations to expend program funds to initiate and administer the Hawaii Retirement Savings Board program. We put this question out there. We don't have a recommendation. We just wanted to make you aware. Okay, so we've spent, we know we've spent about $3,100 out of the 10,000 that you previously authorized. There's probably another small amount that's somewhere, there's probably somewhere $5,000 or $6,000 left in that original $10,000 authorization. So if you folks want to, you can at this time authorize more money or you can wait. I think a lot of this is kind of dependent on previous conversation we had about delegation to the executive director and also the hire. So
Covered for now, right?
I believe so. Okay. Then we will just leave it at that and we will not have a vote on whether or not to authorize more money. Again, this agenda was put together previously and unfortunately things have played out the way they have played out. Is there anybody from the public who would like to provide any comment or testimony on this agenda item at this time? Seeing none, we will move on to agenda item number 8. Discussion and approval of the position description for the program specialist. So we developed a position description for the board's consideration. This was at Director Salaveria's suggestion, I think, in the second meeting that we had. So the program would have the option of hiring a temporary 89-day worker to help with the board's duties if there's no executive director, as well as for the executive director to bring someone on quickly when the executive director was hired. The description is tailored to the position, but flexible and be relatively easy for the executive director to amend before or after hiring a temporary or permanent candidate. So the question before the board is, well, I guess it's kind of two parts. You can approve the position description.
We approve it as draft. That can really well done.
Is there any discussion by any members of the board? Is there any member of the public who would like to provide comment or testimony at this time? Seeing none, I'll go ahead and take the vote then from voting members. Jesse Keola Dean. Barbara Creed. Andrew Nomura. Brian Taniguchi.
Aye.
Karen Yasukawa.
Yes.
Director Salavari is absent. Myself, William Kunzman, I vote in the affirmative. And I believe that is it for that. So you've approved the position description. And we'll see how things play out here in the near future. There may be an agenda item to go ahead and seek board approval for hiring a candidate for that position. The next agenda item is announcements. Does anybody have any announcements at this time? Mr. Taniguchi.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
I've been concerned about the statute and the current opt-in situation. So legislature's coming up. So I'm wondering, should we have maybe our esteemed legislative members to maybe start thinking about drafting something for the upcoming session?
Yes.
Because yeah, I think, yeah, otherwise we lose another year. It's really happening. So, but I'm not sure exactly how to phrase that or do it, but I was thinking maybe we could just have them independently, work on what we think we should do to amend the statute. And then maybe work together, see if we can come up with a draft. If we cannot, then
Who are you talking about, working together? Who's working together?
Senator Milwaukee and this Representative Garrett.
We need that done. I mean,
Yeah.
we're just off base. We need that done.
What do you think, Bill? Mr. Kunstler?
Yes. So I think Mike and I had reviewed what the sunshine law had provided for, because there are specific provisions for the consideration of legislative proposals and testimony in the sunshine law and guidance. And I think without an executive director, I don't think the board can provide any kind of testimony outside of looking at a specific proposal in a meeting and voting to approve or disapprove of any kind of proposal. I don't know if there's anything
I
else.
think it gets a little murky when the board itself is engaging in legislation.
I did not interpret Mr. Taniguchi's comment that way. I thought he was just saying that we know what needs to be done. And perhaps our senator and representative on the committee could work on that.
Bill? Oh,
Senator?
Yeah, I think the board has had that discussion from the first meeting, I think, of wanting to do that, but it's not an agenda item on the boards. It's not an item on the board's agenda, but if it were put on the board's agenda, I know that ERS and our EUTF, they put bills forward because the board has voted on it. So I don't know, I don't think it's too late if the board is going to meet again in January to put it on the agenda. And then if we've got some language, Andrew and I could work on something and then get it to the boards on at the next meeting, so that the board can in fact pursue opting out.
I'm hesitant about that suggestion because again, we don't have an executive director. I think if if bills were introduced in the legislature, the department could provide testimony supporting the intent that would probably align with the board's predilections, and that might be a little bit easier than trying to go about having board meetings and developing a language and a proposal, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
So when I was on the EUTF board, we faced exactly this issue. How do you handle responding to legislative proposals and do testimony without having a board meeting for every step of the way? And the answer is you delegate the authority to our previous discussion, which I would assume, assuming director and deputy director were willing, we could delegate the authority to DLIR director and deputy director, giving the general direction, the direction being we want opt out rather than opt in, and making that clear.
Yeah, I guess,
Well, I think that we could develop some language and, informally get your comments. And Andrew, I could introduce the bill. And then the board could look at the bill as other bills that might impact on retirement savings plans. And
I think we have to
justify,
be careful about sunshine law provisions.
or you would have it as at the board meeting, because the board makes decisions. I think other boards have testified on issues that affect them. And they come and the chair would testify versus the chair or the executive director testifies on the issue itself.
We don't have an executive director.
Yeah, the board chair can do.
I think you might have to go bathroom.
I think the suggestion was for the department to testify in regards to something that is currently housed under its jurisdiction in this matter, and I think the department is well aware of the inclinations of the board. I think that might be a safer way to avoid any kind of sunshine issues, or especially in lack of an executive director.
yeah, and I think, informally doing things between the board and might not be the best way to go.
I think the board has the authority to actually speak out on behalf of the retirement savings plan. So even if you don't have an executive director, at these kinds of meetings, which is an open meeting, you can put forward, this is what bills are on the table at the legislature, and do we support, do we oppose, and can speak on their own behalf. And the Labor Department can also speak on the bill itself. But you're separate, you have to separate out the board and its authority and decision-making authority on issues that pertain to their work. So I think you could have the both, which would make it more powerful to pass a bill, to have it come from the board itself. That's how a number of bills that we see in the Labor Committee coming from ERS or EU2F, they're either the executive director, and if you don't have one, the board chair comes and testifies. So it could be done, and I guess the AG can look into that as what the process might be, but it's very powerful. It comes from the board because you're the experts that are appointed by the governor. So anyway, that's how I
I guess
see
my
it.
concern was just that.
Yeah.
The deadline to introduce bills is gonna be like by the third or fourth week of January, so.
We could introduce the bills, we could write the bills or get somebody to draft the bills if you give us some content. And Andrew and I could introduce them, but I think it's a matter of, getting the bills passed. So we want some experts.
I think we're giving content to the legislature from the board is the problematic aspect. And maybe there's somebody out there who's willing to work with the legislature that's not part of the board.
That has their hand.
Maybe if I could call on.
Okay, I see Kaylee is volunteering. I see her hand.
Okay. All right, thank you.
No, 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 my hand's not raised to volunteer, although we would be happy to. I did want to state that if the board, and I realize you're not taking a vote and it's not on the agenda, do want certain issues to be addressed in legislation, it'd be good to know generally what they are, and I think we could work with you know, the senator and representative, as well as presumably the deputy director of DLIR, for whom the program is under in an administrative function, can identify those things. I think knowing what those are and trying to address those absolutely can be done. The question really is whether there's sufficient information. I know that the hope was that a analysis would be done and that perhaps there would be data available to help legislators understand that feasibility of the program is very limited without the opt-in options. So, you know, hopefully, absent that kind of information and data, legislators are still going to be willing to consider the opt-in issue. Yes, opt-out.
So I think that's a good discussion. I think we will probably have a meeting of the board, hopefully before the end of this month, but for a very specific purpose. Regardless, I think we will probably, it would behoove us to schedule a board meeting near the after bill introduction is over at the legislature, so the board could look actually at specific proposals. And maybe at that time, they could make a recommendation that, and that they could delegate to the co-chair at that time to submit testimony on behalf of the board. And in order to provide board feedback to a specific legislative proposal.
Yeah, we
Does
can
that sound-
look into it, get a little bit better clarification how this would work. Because you
Okay,
might have public notice issues and. agenda
yeah, that's why I'm
issues, and, I mean,
saying,
there's sort of several pieces.
yeah, and then bills get amended, so I mean, I
We should
think,
agendize legislative proposal discussion on each of our board meetings throughout the session,
yes,
whenever those meetings may be.
yes, and look at specific legislative proposals. Okay, well, there's a lot of, a lot involved here, so. Is there any other, thank you for that, by the way, Brian, it's a great point. Is there any other announcements at this time? I do have one announcement that I have to make, and that is to let you all know that Nancy is gonna be leaving.
Off the record.
Oh,
Off the record.
I asked you.
Off the record. Can't say mine.
All right, so. If there's nothing else, no other announcements, we're gonna adjourn the meeting.
Okay, Merry Christmas, everybody.
Christmas.
Okay.